The rope bit into the orc girl's wrists so deeply that green skin had turned dark around the bindings, and when Prescott Calloway's knife finally severed the last fiber, she collapsed forward into the mud with a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He caught her before her face hit the ground, his calloused farmer's hands surprisingly gentle as he eased her onto her side, and for a moment they both simply breathed in the rain-soaked darkness of the forest clearing. The slavers had left her tied to a tree when they heard his approach, scattering like rats into the underbrush, and now it was just the two of them beneath a sky-threatening dawn. "Easy," Prescott said, his voice rough from years of talking more to livestock than people. "You're safe now." The orc girl's eyes were amber in the dim light, wide and disbelieving. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with the build of someone who had known hard labor but not enough food. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her lower lip, and a nasty bruise spread across her left cheekbone. The tattered remains of what had once been a simple tunic hung from her frame, and her feet were bare and bleeding. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly pushed herself up to her knees. Her movements were deliberate despite the obvious pain, and when she settled back on her heels, she bowed her head low. "My life is yours now," she said, her accent thick but her words clear. "You have freed me. By the old laws of my people, I am bound to you until the debt is repaid." Prescott sat back on his heels, his knife still in his hand. "That's not necessary. I don't want it is done." Her voice was firm despite the tremor in her shoulders. "I am Grishka. I will serve you with my strength, my blood, my days. This is the way." "Well, hell," Prescott muttered, running a hand through his wet hair. He was 32 years old, had fought in the border wars for 5 years before returning to his father's farm, and in all that time, he had never quite figured out how to handle situations that did not involve clear enemies or predictable seasons. This girl kneeling in the mud, claiming she owed him her life, was neither of those things. Rain began to fall harder, turning the clearing into a mess of puddles and slick earth. Prescott made a decision. "Can you walk?" he asked. Grishka lifted her head slightly. "Yes." "Then let's get out of this weather. My farm is an hour from here. You can rest there, get warm, and we'll figure out the rest come morning." He stood and offered his hand. She stared at it for a moment as if it were a foreign object, then carefully placed her own hand in his. Her palm was rough with calluses, her fingers longer and stronger than a human woman's. He pulled her to her feet and felt her sway slightly before she steadied herself. "Can you really walk?" he asked again, more gently this time. "I will walk," she said, which was not quite the same thing. They moved through the forest in silence, Prescott leading the way with the confidence of someone who knew every deer trail and creek bed in these woods. Grishka followed a few steps behind, limping but determined, her breath coming in measured intervals that spoke of someone pushing past pain through sheer will. The sky was turning gray at the edges when they finally emerged from the tree line, and Prescott's farm came into view. It was not much a small house with a stone chimney, a barn that needed new shingles, fields that stretched toward distant hills. But it was his, paid for with his military pension and 6 years of backbreaking work, and the sight of it always settled something in his chest. Grishka stopped at the edge of his property, staring. "What is it?" Prescott asked. "You live alone here." "Yes. It is much land for one person." "It is," he agreed. "Come on. The house is warmer than standing out here." Inside, he lit the fire that he had banked before leaving to check his traps. The main room was simple: a table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, shelves lined with preserved food and basic supplies. A door led to his small bedroom, another to the root cellar. Grishka stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto the wooden floor, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked even smaller inside the house, though she was tall for a woman, easily reaching his shoulder. "Sit," Prescott said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I will get you something dry to wear and tend those wounds." She sat, moving stiffly, and watched him with those unsettling amber eyes as he rummaged through his trunk. He found an old shirt that had been his father's, larger than his own, and a pair of trousers he had outgrown years ago. They would be too big on her, but they were dry and whole. "Change into these," he said, setting them on the table. "I will turn my back." He busied himself with heating water and gathering clean cloth, listening to the rustle of fabric behind him. When she cleared her throat softly, he turned back to find her swimming in his father's shirt, the trousers held up with a piece of rope she must have salvaged from somewhere. She looked absurd and vulnerable, and somehow more real than she had in the forest. "Let me see your wrists," he said. She extended her arms without hesitation. The wounds were worse up close, deep rope burns that had started to scab over only to be torn open again. He cleaned them carefully with warm water, his movements practiced from years of tending to animals and his own injuries. She did not flinch, though he saw her jaw tighten when the cloth pressed against the worst of it. "How did you end up with slavers?" he asked as he worked. "They raided my clan's settlement 2 months ago," Grishka said quietly. "Killed the warriors, took the young and the strong. I tried to fight." "It did not matter. I'm sorry." She looked at him with something like surprise. "You fought against my people in the wars. It was not a question." Prescott wrapped her wrist with clean cloth, tying it off securely before moving to the other. "I did. And yet you freed me. The war has been over for 3 years, and I never held with slavery, no matter who it was being done to. Your people do not see it that way. To most humans, an orc in chains is the natural order of things." Prescott finished wrapping her second wrist and sat back. "My people can be fools. So can yours. Does not mean we have to be." The corner of Grishka's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You are strange, human." "Prescott," he corrected. "My name is Prescott Calloway." "Prescott Calloway," she repeated, testing the syllables. "I am Grishka of the Ironhide clan, or I was. I do not know if they still live. We can try to find out once you are healed." She shook her head firmly. "No, even if they live, I am dead to them now. I was captured. I brought shame. And now I have sworn myself to a human. There is no going back." The weight of that settled between them, heavy as stone. Prescott had not considered the full implications of her oath, had thought it merely a cultural formality that could be politely dismissed. But looking at her face, at the set of her jaw and the certainty in her eyes, he understood that she meant every word. "You should rest," he said finally. "You can have the bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "No," Grishka stood, though the movement clearly pained her. "I will not take your bed. I will sleep in the barn. You will sleep in the bed," Prescott said, his voice taking on the tone he had used to command men during the war. "You are injured and exhausted. This is not a discussion." For a moment he thought she might argue, but then she bowed her head slightly. "As you wish." He showed her to the small bedroom, which contained little more than a bed frame with a straw mattress, a thin blanket, and a chest that held his few belongings. She sat on the edge of the bed as if afraid it might collapse beneath her. "Rest," Prescott said from the doorway. "We will talk more when you wake." But he found himself unable to sleep, lying on the floor by the fire with his coat as a pillow, listening to the sound of rain on the roof, and thinking about amber eyes and rope burns, and the strange twist of fate that had brought an orc girl into his home. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be responsible for another person, to have someone else's breathing echoing in the next room. When morning came, gray and damp, he rose to find Grishka already awake and standing in the main room, looking uncertain. I did not know if I should wake you, she said. No need. Are you hungry? Yes. He made a simple breakfast of porridge and dried apples, and they ate in a silence that was less comfortable than the one from the night before. In the growing light, he could see more clearly the extent of her injuries, not just the wrists and feet, but older scars on her arms and what looked like a poorly healed cut above her left eyebrow. What do you usually do? Grishka asked suddenly. In the mornings. Tend to the animals. Check the fields. Mend whatever broke the day before. He paused. But you should rest today. Let yourself heal. I am healed enough to work. You can barely walk. I can work, she insisted, and there was something fierce in her voice that made him reconsider. He thought of the soldiers he had served with, the ones who had needed to feel useful, even when injured, because the alternative was to sit and think about things best left alone. Perhaps orcs were not so different. All right, he said. But if you push too hard and hurt yourself worse, I am going to say I told you so. That surprised a laugh out of her, short and startled, and it transformed her face entirely. For a moment she looked not like someone who had been through hell, but simply like a young woman finding something funny. They worked together through the morning, Prescott doing the heavy labor while Grishka helped where she could, gathering eggs from the chickens, hanging grain to dry in the barn, sorting through vegetables in the root cellar. She moved carefully but without complaint, and he found himself adjusting his pace to accommodate her without making it obvious. The chickens regarded her with deep suspicion at first, but she spoke to them in her own language, a low, rumbling string of sounds that seemed to calm them. Soon they were pecking around her feet as if she had always been there. You have a way with animals, Prescott observed. My clan kept herds, Grishka said, carefully placing eggs in the basket. I grew up among the goats and cattle. They do not care what color your skin is, only that you are kind and predictable. Wish more people were like that. Yes, she said softly. Wish. By midday, the rain had stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Prescott declared a break for lunch, and they sat outside on a bench near the house, eating bread and cheese while looking out over the fields. This is good land, Grishka said. Rich soil, good water. It is. Took me 2 years to clear all the stones from that north field, he pointed. Sometimes I think they breed underground and come back up overnight. She laughed again, more easily this time. Stones are stubborn that way. They fell into a comfortable rhythm over the following days. Grishka proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker once her injuries began to heal. She was up before dawn each morning, already tending to the animals by the time Prescott emerged from his makeshift bed by the fire. She learned the layout of the farm, the quirks of each piece of equipment, the personalities of the livestock. The chickens came to adore her, following her around like small, feathered disciples. Prescott found himself looking forward to the work in a way he had not in years. Having someone to share the labor with made the days feel shorter, the tasks less monotonous. Grishka was not much for idle chatter, but she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. And sometimes while they worked, she would sing in her own language deep, rhythmic songs that seemed to make the plants grow taller. 2 weeks after he had brought her home, Prescott woke to find her standing at the window, staring out at the fields with an expression he could not quite read. "What is it?" he asked, rising from his spot by the fire. "I am trying to understand you," Grishka said without turning around. "Not sure there is much to understand. I am a simple man." "No," she faced him then. "You are not simple. You fought in the wars against my people. You have killed orcs. I can see it in the way you move, the way you watch the tree line. And yet you freed me. You brought me to your home. You share your food and give me your father's clothes and do not ask me to." She trailed off, color darkening her green cheeks. "To what? to pay you back in ways that slaves are usually expected to pay. Understanding hit him like cold water. Christ, no. Grishka, I would never, I know, she said quickly. That is what I am trying to understand, why you would not. Prescott sat down heavily at the table. I saw a lot of things during the war, a lot of things that made me ashamed to be human. When it was over, I swore I would not contribute to that kind of ugliness anymore, that I would try to be. He struggled for the words, better than what the war made me. Grishka moved to sit across from him. You think you are a bad man. I think I have done bad things. So have I, she said quietly. I killed 3 human soldiers during the raid on my clan. Young men, barely old enough to shave. I can still see their faces when I close my eyes. They sat in shared silence, the weight of old violence hanging between them like smoke. Maybe we are both trying to be better, Grishka said finally. Maybe we are. Something shifted between them in that moment. Some unspoken understanding that they were both carrying burdens too heavy to bear alone. After that, their conversations grew deeper, stretching into the evenings after the work was done. She told him about her clan, about growing up in the mountains with her 3 brothers and her mother who could sing the storms away. He told her about his father's farm, about joining the military because he thought it was the honorable thing to do, about coming home to find his parents dead from fever and the farm falling apart. You rebuilt it alone, Grishka said one night as they sat by the fire. Seemed like the only option. You could have sold it, moved to a town, found easier work. Could have, he agreed. But this place is all I have left of them. Seemed wrong to let it go. She nodded slowly. My mother used to say that the dead live on in the places they loved. That if you tend to those places, you keep them alive in some small way. Your mother sounds like she was wise. She was. Grishka's voice went soft. I hope she died before the slavers came. I hope she did not see what happened to us. Prescott reached across the space between them and took her hand. She startled at the touch, but did not pull away, and they sat like that until the fire burned low. Fingers intertwined, neither speaking because there were no words adequate for that kind of shared grief. The first frost came in late October, arriving overnight and painting the world in crystalline white. Prescott woke to find Grishka already outside, standing in the middle of the yard with her face turned up to the pale morning sky. She was wearing a coat he had given her, far too large, and her breath plumed in the cold air. First frost at home always meant the celebration of the turning, she said when he joined her. 3 days of feasting and stories to honor the old gods and ask for their blessing through the winter. We have harvest festivals here, Prescott said, though nothing that lasts 3 days. What do you do? Usually, work. The animals do not care about festivals. Grishka looked at him with something that might have been pity. That is a sad way to live. It is practical. It is lonely. She was right, and he knew it. And somehow having her pointed out made the loneliness feel more acute than it had in years. He had told himself that solitude was simpler, safer, that after the war he needed the quiet. But standing in the frost-covered yard with an orc girl who sang to his chickens and laughed at his jokes about stubborn stones, he realized how much he had been missing. Tell me about the celebration, he said. About the turning. So she did, describing the great fires her clan would build, the way the elders would tell stories of heroes long dead, the dances that lasted until dawn. Her voice grew animated as she spoke, her hands moving to illustrate, and Prescott found himself captivated not by the details but by the passion in her eyes, the way she leaned forward as if trying to pull him into her memories. It sounds wonderful, he said when she finished. It was. She looked down at her hands. I miss it. I miss them. I'm sorry, do not be. If the slavers had not taken me, if you had not freed me, I would not be here, and I. She hesitated. I am glad to be here with you. That is a strange thing to feel, yes. To be grateful for terrible things because they led somewhere good, not strange, Prescott said, his throat tight. Human. I am not human. You know what I mean. She smiled at him, small and sad and achingly genuine. Yes, I know. That night, Prescott surprised her by suggesting they mark the turning in their own way. They built a large fire in the yard, far larger than was practical, and cooked a feast by its light, or as much of a feast as they could manage with what they had. Roasted chicken and root vegetables, and the last of the good bread. Grishka taught him one of her clan's songs, patient with his fumbling pronunciation, and he told her stories his father had told him about the founding of their region. They stayed by the fire until the stars wheeled overhead, and when Grishka finally stood to go inside, she paused and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for making me feel less alone." "You do the same for me," Prescott replied, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Winter came in earnest after that, bringing snow and bitter cold. The work became harder, the days shorter, but somehow Prescott found himself happier than he had been in years. Grishka was a constant presence, capable and strong, and they developed an easy partnership that needed few words. He taught her to read and write in the common tongue, spending evenings by the fire with a primer he had kept from childhood. She was a quick student, frustrated by her mistakes but determined, and the look of triumph on her face when she successfully read her first full sentence made something warm bloom in his chest. One night in December, a blizzard rolled in with frightening speed. They barely managed to get the animals secured before the world turned white and howling. Inside, they huddled close to the fire, listening to the wind shake the shutters. "This is bad," Prescott said, feeding more wood into the flames. "Could last days. We have food, enough. Water too. We will be fine as long as we stay inside and keep warm." But as the hours passed and the temperature dropped, it became clear that the fire alone would not be enough to keep the cold at bay. Prescott could see Grishka shivering despite the extra coat and blankets he had piled on her. "We need to share heat," he said, trying to keep his voice matter-of-fact. "It is just practical." Grishka looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." They arranged themselves near the fire, wrapped together in every blanket they owned. It was awkward at first, both of them too aware of every point of contact, but gradually they relaxed into it. Grishka's head came to rest on his shoulder, her arm across his chest, and Prescott allowed himself to wrap his arms around her in return. She was warm and solid against him, her breathing steady, and for the first time since the war he felt completely at peace. "Prescott," she murmured after a while. "Yes. I am glad it was you who found me in the forest. I am glad it was you." His arms tightened around her. "So am I." They stayed like that through the night, and when morning came pale and cold, the blizzard still raging outside, neither of them moved to separate. At some point, Prescott realized that what he felt for Grishka had grown into something far beyond gratitude or friendship. She had become essential to him, as much a part of his daily life as breathing, and the thought of her leaving, of being alone again, was physically painful. But he said nothing, because what could he say? She was an orc, he was human, and the world had very clear opinions about such things. The nearest town was 5 miles away, and he knew without asking what would happen if he brought her there. At best, suspicion and hostility. At worst, violence. He had built a safe haven here on his isolated farm, but it was a small haven, and the world beyond its borders was not kind. The blizzard lasted 3 days. When it finally cleared, they emerged to find the world transformed into a pristine landscape of white. The drifts came up to Prescott's knees in places, and the work of digging out was exhausting. But they worked side by side as they always did, and by nightfall they had cleared paths to the barn and the well. "I could not have done this alone," Prescott said as they stumbled back inside, exhausted and cold. "Not in one day." "You would have," Grishka said. "You are stubborn like those stones you complain about," he laughed, warming his hands by the fire. "Takes one to know one." She swatted his arm, playful, and they grinned at each other like fools. Later, as they ate a simple dinner, Prescott found himself watching her the way firelight caught in her hair, which she had started braiding in intricate patterns, the way her tusks pressed against her lower lip when she concentrated, the graceful strength in her scarred hands. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "You are a terrible liar, I know." She set down her spoon and regarded him seriously. "You can ask me whatever you are wondering. I will not be offended." "I was not wondering anything. I was just—" He struggled for words that would not reveal too much. "Thinking about how different things are now, how different I feel." "Different how?" "Happier," he admitted. "Less like I am just going through the motions, more like I have a reason to get up in the morning beyond habit." Grishka's expression softened. "I feel that too. Before, even with my clan, I always felt like I was trying to fit into a shape that was not quite right. Too curious, too questioning. But here with you, I feel like I can just be myself." "You can," Prescott said with intensity. "Always." Something passed between them, electric and undeniable, and for a moment he thought she might say something more. But then she looked away, color rising in her cheeks, and the moment passed. The weeks that followed were both torture and bliss. Every day brought them closer together. Every shared laugh and comfortable silence another thread binding them, but neither spoke of what was growing between them. Prescott told himself it was better this way, safer. But at night he lay awake by the fire and thought about Amber Eyes and the sound of her singing in the barn. Christmas came, and though Grishka knew nothing of the holiday, Prescott did his best to make it special. He had been saving a small sack of sugar, and he used it to make sweet cakes that were probably terrible but which Grishka ate with such obvious delight that he felt like he had given her the world. "In my clan, we had no holiday like this," she said, licking sugar from her fingers. "But I think I would like to celebrate it every year." "Every year," Prescott repeated, and the words felt like a promise. They exchanged gifts. She gave him a scarf she had knitted from unraveled wool, and he gave her a knife he had been working on in secret, the handle carved with the mountain pattern she had described from her homeland. She held it like it was precious, running her fingers over the carving, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with tears. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "You deserve beautiful things," he said. January brought cold so bitter that even the animals seemed stunned by it. Prescott and Grishka spent more time inside, working on indoor tasks, mending clothes, repairing tools, planning for spring planting. The forced proximity made everything harder and easier all at once. They moved around each other in the small space like dancers, never quite touching but always aware, and the tension stretched taut between them like a wire waiting to snap. It finally broke on a night in late January when Prescott returned from checking on the animals to find Grishka crying by the fire. She tried to hide it when she heard him enter, wiping at her face quickly, but he saw. "What's wrong?" he asked, crossing to her immediately. "Nothing. I am fine." "Grishka," she shook her head, still not looking at him. "It is stupid. Tell me anyway." She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer, but then she said, "I miss them. My family, my clan. I know they are probably dead, and even if they are not, I can never go back. But sometimes it hits me all over again, and I feel like I am drowning in it." Prescott sat beside her and, after a moment's hesitation, pulled her against his side. She came willingly, turning her face into his shoulder, and he held her while she cried. Her tears soaked through his shirt, and her shoulders shook with the force of her grief, and he wished desperately that he could take this pain from her. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. "I'm so sorry." "You have given me so much," she said when she could speak again. "A home, kindness, purpose. I should be grateful. I am grateful. But sometimes gratitude is not enough to fill the empty places." "You do not have to be grateful all the time," Prescott said firmly. "You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to miss what you lost." She pulled back slightly to look at him, her face blotchy from crying but still beautiful to him. "How did you manage it?" "After your parents died, poorly," he admitted. "I threw myself into work and told myself I was fine. It took me years to admit that I was lonely and angry and lost." "What changed you?" he said before he could think better of it. "You changed things, made me realize I had been half alive for a long time." Grishka stared at him, something uncertain and hopeful flickering in her eyes. "Prescott, I know," he said quickly. "I know we cannot. I know how the world works, but I need you to know that you matter to me, that you are not just someone I freed or someone who helps with the farm. You are." He struggled for the right words and gave up, settling for honesty instead. "You are everything." "You are everything to me too," she whispered. I did not want to say it, did not want to make things complicated, but I cannot keep pretending that I feel normal things about you when every day I wake up grateful just to be near you. They looked at each other for a long moment. And then Prescott did what he had been wanting to do for months. He cupped her face in his hands, carefully avoiding her healing wrist, and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise, then kissed him back with an intensity that stole his breath. Her tusks were strange against his lips at first, but then they were just part of her, just another detail that made her who she was. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and hungry, months of unspoken longing pouring out all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grishka laughed shakily. "I have wanted to do that since the blizzard." "Only since the blizzard?" Prescott asked, pressing his forehead to hers. "I have wanted to do that since you first smiled at me. You are ridiculous. You love me anyway." The words hung between them, half teasing but weighted with truth, and Grishka's expression went soft. "I do," she said seriously. "I love you. I know it is foolish and complicated and probably going to make everything harder, but I do." "I love you too," Prescott said, and it felt like the most honest thing he had ever said. "We will figure out the rest." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it, and when they settled back by the fire, Grishka curled against his side with a contentment that matched his own. They talked late into the night, about the future they wanted to build together, about the challenges they would face, about whether the chickens would accept them as a couple or demand separate coops in protest. "We will have to be careful," Grishka said eventually. "If anyone finds out, no one will," Prescott promised. "We are 5 miles from town and I only go in when I absolutely have to. We can be happy here, just us. You do not think you will grow tired of me, of the complications?" "Never." He kissed the top of her head. "You are worth every complication in the world." February brought thaw and the first tentative signs of spring. The days grew longer, the work in the fields more demanding, and Prescott and Grishka settled into their new relationship with the same practical partnership that had defined everything else about their lives together. They were careful not to be obvious in their affection during the day, though there was no one to see, but at night they slept curled together by the fire, and those hours felt sacred. But their isolated happiness could not last forever. In early March, Prescott needed to go into town to buy seed for spring planting and to sell some of the winter wool. He had been putting it off, reluctant to leave the farm or bring Grishka anywhere near other people, but necessity finally won out. "I will come with you," Grishka said when he announced his plans. "That is not a good idea. You think I do not know how people will react?" She lifted her chin stubbornly. "I am not ashamed of what I am, and if we are to build a life together, I cannot hide forever." "I'm not asking you to hide forever, just to be smart. These people, they are not kind to orcs." "Then they can learn to be better," Grishka said firmly. "Or they can ignore me, but I will not cower on your farm like I am something shameful." Prescott recognized the futility of arguing when she got like this. "Fine. But we stick together, and if things get bad, we leave immediately." "Agreed." "Agreed." The ride into town took 2 hours, the cart loaded with wool and pulled by Prescott's aging mare. Grishka sat beside him on the bench, her face turned toward the passing landscape with an expression of wonder. It was the first time she had been off the farm since he brought her there, and despite his anxiety, Prescott found himself smiling at her enthusiasm. "Look at that tree," she exclaimed at one point. "It has to be 100 years old." "Probably older," Prescott said. "The Elm family that used to farm that land planted it when they first settled here. That was back before the wars." "Do they still farm there?" "No. They moved away after their son died in the fighting. Couldn't stand to stay, I think." Grishka fell quiet at that, and Prescott cursed himself for bringing it up. But then she took his hand, squeezing gently, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. The town of Millbrook was small, barely 100 people, centered around a main street with a general store, a blacksmith, a tavern, and a church. Prescott had grown up coming here with his father, knew most of the families by name, but he had largely avoided it since returning from the war. Too many questions, too many people who remembered who he had been before. They felt the stares the moment they rolled onto the main street. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, people turned to gawk, and a small child actually pointed before her mother yanked her hand down. Prescott kept his expression neutral and helped Grishka down from the cart. "Remember," he said quietly, "stick together." "I remember." The general store was run by Martha Hendricks, a stern woman in her 50s who had once been kind to Prescott as a boy. She looked up when the bell jangled, saw them, and her expression went carefully blank. "Prescott," she said, "it has been a while. Mrs. Hendricks," he nodded politely. "I need seed for spring planting, the usual varieties." "And who is this?" Martha's gaze fixed on Grishka with undisguised suspicion. "This is Grishka. She works on my farm. An orc." "Yes." Martha's mouth thinned. "I see." The transaction was tense and brief. Martha measured out the seed with brisk efficiency, barely speaking except to name prices. Other customers who had been browsing made excuses and left. Prescott paid, trying to control his anger at their rudeness, and when they were back outside, he let out a long breath. "That went well," Grishka said dryly. "It could have been worse." "Could it?" They were loading the seed into the cart when a group of men emerged from the tavern. Prescott recognized them, local farmers, some of whom he had grown up with. They were clearly drunk despite the early hour, and their expressions when they saw Grishka were not friendly. "Well, well," said a man named Thomas Ridge, a thick-necked bully who Prescott had never liked. "Prescott Calloway keeping company with greenskins now. Thought you fought against them, not for them." "Leave it alone, Thomas," Prescott said evenly. "We are just here to buy supplies." "That thing working your farm?" another man asked. "Or is she keeping you warm at night?" Prescott's hands clenched into fists, but Grishka put a hand on his arm. "Do not," she said quietly. "It is not worth it." "Listen to your pet, Calloway," Thomas sneered. "Though I have to wonder what kind of man takes an orc to bed. Must be pretty desperate." "Say that again," Prescott said, his voice going dangerously soft. Thomas grinned, sensing weakness. I said you must be. He did not get to finish. Prescott's fist caught him square in the jaw, and Thomas went down hard. The other men surged forward, and then everything was chaos. Prescott fought with the cold efficiency the military had taught him, taking down 2 more men before someone landed a lucky hit to his ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Then Grishka was there, pulling him back, putting herself between him and the angry farmers. Enough! She shouted, and there was something in her voice, some quality of command that made them pause. We are leaving. Damn right you are, Thomas spat, climbing to his feet with blood streaming from his nose. And do not come back. We do not want your kind here. Prescott wanted to argue, to fight, to make them understand, but Grishka was already pulling him toward the cart. They climbed up, and he urged the mare into a fast walk, acutely aware of the hostile eyes following them out of town. They rode in silence for a long time, the tension slowly bleeding out of Prescott's shoulders as Millbrook disappeared behind them. His ribs ached where he had been hit, and his knuckles were split and bleeding, but he barely noticed. He was too angry at Thomas, at the town, at the world for being what it was. You should not have hit him, Grishka said finally. He deserved it, maybe, but it did not help anything. I was not trying to help. I was trying to make him shut his mouth. And did you? Prescott thought about Thomas's threats, about the hatred in those men's eyes. No, he admitted. Probably made it worse. Grishka sighed. I told you it was not a good idea for me to come. Do not, Prescott said sharply. Do not act like this is your fault. Those men are ignorant assholes. You did nothing wrong. I exist. To them, that is wrong enough. He pulled the cart to a stop and turned to face her fully. Then they are fools. Grishka, you are worth 10 of any of those men, 100. And if they cannot see that, it is their loss, not yours. Her eyes searched his face. You really believe that, with everything I am? She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and fierce all at once. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. I love you, she said. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, Prescott replied, wiping away her tears with his thumb. And we are going to be fine. We do not need that town or anyone in it. We have each other and the farm, and that is enough. Is it? Can we really spend the rest of our lives hidden away? If that is what it takes to keep you safe and happy, then yes. They made it back to the farm by late afternoon, both exhausted and emotionally drained. The animals greeted them with enthusiasm, particularly the chickens, who swarmed Grishka like she had been gone for weeks instead of hours. At least someone is happy to see me, she said, scattering feed for them. I am happy to see you, Prescott protested. I am always happy to see you. You know what I mean, he did, and it made his chest ache. That night, as they lay together by the fire, he thought about the future they were trying to build and whether it was sustainable. Could they really hide away forever? What happened if he got sick or injured and needed help? What happened if someone from town decided to make trouble? But then Grishka shifted in her sleep, her arm tightening around his waist, and he decided that he did not care. Whatever came, they would face it together. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing longer days and backbreaking work. They plowed the fields, planted the seed they had bought in Millbrook, and tended to the growing things with careful attention. Grishka proved to have a natural talent for cultivation, coaxing life from the soil with a skill that bordered on magic. Under her care, the crops grew strong and healthy, better than Prescott had ever managed alone. You have a gift, he told her one evening as they surveyed their work. My mother taught me, Grishka said. She said plants are like people, they need food and water and sunlight, yes, but they also need respect, need to be listened to. Plants do not talk. Not in words, she agreed, but they communicate. You just have to pay attention. He loved her even more in those moments, when she shared pieces of herself that no one else would understand. She was practical and mystical all at once, grounded and otherworldly, and she fit into his life so perfectly it was as if some god had carved out a space for her beside him. But their peace was shattered in late April when Prescott returned from hunting to find Grishka standing rigid in the yard, staring at 3 figures on horseback at the edge of his property. They were soldiers, wearing the king's colors, and they watched her with hands on their weapons. "Can I help you?" Prescott called, walking forward quickly to put himself between them and Grishka. The lead soldier, a young man with a severe face, looked him over. "Prescott Calloway, that's me. We received reports that you are harboring an orc on your property. Is this true?" Prescott's mind raced. "She works for me. She is not a prisoner or a threat." "Orcs are always a threat," the soldier said. "There has been increased raiding in the northern territories. We are rounding up any orcs found in human settlements for questioning." "She has been here since October," Prescott said firmly. "She has had nothing to do with any raids. Nevertheless, we will need to take her in." "Like hell you will." The soldier's hand tightened on his sword. "Do not make this difficult, Calloway. We have our orders." "I do not care about your orders," Prescott snapped. "She has done nothing wrong. She is under my protection. She is an orc. She has no rights and no protection under the law." Grishka stepped forward, her voice calm despite the fear Prescott could see in her eyes. "I will go with them," she said. "I will not let you get hurt for me." "No," Prescott said immediately. "You are not going anywhere." "Prescott, no," he rounded on the soldiers. "I fought in the border wars for 5 years, served with honor. Does that count for nothing?" "It counts for a great deal," the young soldier said, and he actually looked sympathetic. "But orders are orders. If you interfere, we will be forced to arrest you as well." They were at an impasse, and Prescott was trying to figure out how to fight 3 armed soldiers without getting himself or Grishka killed when another voice called out. "Hold there." An older man rode up, his horse lathered with sweat like he had been riding hard. Prescott recognized him immediately, Captain Harold Mitchell, who had commanded his unit during the war. He looked older now, his hair gone completely gray, but his eyes were still sharp. "Captain Mitchell," the young soldier said with surprise. "Sir, we were just—" "I heard," Mitchell interrupted. He dismounted and walked over to Prescott, looking him up and down. "Calloway, been a long time." "Captain," Prescott said warily. Mitchell's gaze shifted to Grishka. "This the orc they are making a fuss about?" "Yes, sir. Her name is Grishka. She has been working on my farm peacefully for months." "And you can vouch for her, with my life." Mitchell studied them both for a long moment, then turned back to the soldiers. "Stand down, I will handle this." "But sir, our orders are superseded by mine. I am still a captain in the king's army and you will do as I say. Is that clear?" The young soldier looked unhappy but nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Return to your patrol. I will file the report." The 3 soldiers rode off, casting backward glances at Grishka that ranged from suspicious to outright hostile. When they were out of sight, Mitchell turned back to Prescott and Grishka. "All right," he said. "Someone explain to me what the hell is going on here." So they did, alternating the story between them, how they met, how Grishka came to live on the farm, the work they had built together. Mitchell listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, and when they finished he was quiet for a long time. "You love her," he said finally to Prescott. It was not a question. "Yes. And you?" Mitchell asked Grishka. "How do you feel?" "I love him," she said simply. "He saved my life. He gave me a home. But more than that, he sees me as a person, not a monster. How could I not love him?" Mitchell sighed heavily. "You two are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." "Does it matter?" Prescott asked. "Are you going to take her away?" "No. Mitchell said. "But you need to understand the danger you are in. The war may be over officially, but tensions are high. There have been raids and people are scared. An orc living peacefully on a farm does not fit the narrative, and narratives are what people cling to when they are frightened. So what do we do? Keep your heads down. Do not go into town. If anyone asks, Grishka is an indentured servant working off a debt. That is legal and gives her some protection under the law, and for God's sake, be careful." "Why are you helping us?" Grishka asked. Mitchell looked at her steadily. "Because I am tired of war, tired of hate. I have seen what it does to people, seen good men become monsters because they stopped seeing the enemy as human or orc, as the case may be. If you two can find a way to live peacefully together, then maybe there is hope for the rest of us." He paused. "Also, Calloway saved my life twice during the war. I owe him." "You do not owe me anything, Captain," Prescott said. "Maybe not. But I am helping you anyway. Stay out of trouble, and I will make sure the patrols leave you alone." He remounted his horse and rode away, leaving Prescott and Grishka standing in the yard, shaken but relieved. That night they held each other tightly, both acutely aware of how close they had come to being separated. "We cannot keep living like this," Grishka said into the darkness. "Always afraid that someone will come and tear us apart. I know. Maybe we should leave, go west to the territories where there is more land and fewer people. We could start over somewhere no one knows us." Prescott considered it. The idea was appealing in many ways, a fresh start, a place where they could be open about their relationship. But it also meant leaving the only home he had ever known, abandoning the farm his parents had built and that he had poured years of his life into. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "We do not have to decide tonight." "All right." But the question haunted him over the following weeks. He found himself looking at his fields differently, cataloging what he would miss and what he would be glad to leave behind. The farm was full of memories, some good, many painful, and he was no longer sure if staying was about honoring his parents or about being afraid to move forward. In early May, the decision was made for them. Prescott woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, grabbing Grishka's shoulder to wake her. "Fire," he said shortly. They rushed outside to find the barn ablaze, flames leaping into the night sky. The animals were screaming, trapped inside, and Prescott's heart seized with panic. He ran toward the barn, but the heat drove him back. "The animals," Grishka shouted. "It is too hot. I cannot," but she was already moving, wrapping a wet blanket around herself and plunging into the smoke. Prescott cursed and followed, the world narrowing to heat and choking darkness and the sound of terrified animals. Together, they managed to drive the livestock out, coughing and singed but alive. The chickens scattered into the night, and the cow and 2 goats fled toward the relative safety of the far field. By the time they got everyone out, the barn was a total loss. They watched it collapse in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the sky like malevolent stars. "It was not an accident," Grishka said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Look." She pointed to where several torches lay on the ground, clearly thrown. Someone had done this deliberately. Prescott felt rage rise in him like a tide, hot and consuming. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas and his friends. They did this. You do not know that for certain. Who else would it be?" Grishka had no answer for that. They spent the rest of the night making sure the fire did not spread to the house or fields, hauling water from the well until their arms shook with exhaustion. By the time dawn came, gray and cheerless, they were both covered in soot and burns. Prescott surveyed the damage with a sinking heart. The barn was gone, along with all the tools and equipment stored inside. The animals had survived but were traumatized. And worst of all, the message was clear. They were not safe here. "We need to leave," Grishka said quietly. "They will come back. Next time it might be the house. Next time we might not wake up in time." Prescott knew she was right, but the admission felt like defeat. "This is my home." "And it is trying to kill us," Grishka said, not unkindly. "Prescott, I know what this place means to you, but is it worth dying for? Is it worth watching them burn everything you have built?" He looked at her soot-stained, exhausted, still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and knew that the answer was no. The farm was just land and buildings. What mattered was standing right in front of him. "All right," he said. "We will go west, find somewhere we can start over." Relief flickered across her face. "You are sure?" "I am sure." He took her hand. "My home is wherever you are. Everything else is just a place." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Prescott sold what he could to a passing merchant, keeping only what they could carry or load onto the cart. It was painful to watch strangers pick through his parents' belongings, offering pittance for things that were priceless to him, but necessity drove him forward. Captain Mitchell came by to check on them and was grim-faced when he heard what had happened. "I will investigate," he promised. "If I find proof that someone did this deliberately, they will hang." "It will not matter," Prescott said. "We are leaving anyway." "That is probably wise. Where will you go?" "West, the territories." Mitchell nodded slowly. "It is hard country out there, but fair in its way. Everyone is too busy surviving to care about what your neighbor looks like." He pressed a small purse into Prescott's hand. "Take this. Call it back pay you never collected." "Captain, I cannot." "You can, and you will. Consider it payment for all the times you kept me from getting killed during the war." They left on a morning in late May, the cart loaded with their possessions and pulled by Prescott's mare. The cow was tied behind, and they had managed to catch 3 of the chickens, which rode in a makeshift coop. Grishka carried her knife in her belt and wore a traveling cloak Prescott had bought her. She looked like an adventurer from a story, brave and determined, and he loved her so much it was a physical ache. He took one last look at the farm, at the charred remains of the barn, at the house where he had been born, at the fields he had worked for years, and then he turned his back on it and did not look again. The journey west took 3 weeks. They followed rough trails through increasingly wild country, camping at night under the stars and rationing their supplies carefully. Grishka hunted when she could, bringing down rabbits and once a small deer with the bow Prescott taught her to use. He caught fish from streams, and they foraged for early berries and edible plants. It was hard, often uncomfortable, occasionally frightening when they heard wolves howling in the distance or saw signs of bandits. But it was also liberating. Out here, away from towns and settlements, they could be themselves without fear. They held hands while they walked, kissed by the light of their campfire, made plans for the future with excitement rather than dread. "What will we do when we get there?" Grishka asked one night as they lay beneath a blanket of stars. "Find land, build a new farm, maybe something smaller this time, more manageable." "I would like that." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think we could have a family someday?" Prescott's breath caught. He had not let himself think about that possibility. It seemed too much to hope for. "You want children." "I want everything with you," she said simply. "A home, a family, a life. I want to grow old working side by side with you. I want to teach our children to sing to the plants and be kind to animals. I want it all." "Then we will have it," Prescott promised, kissing her forehead. "All of it." They reached the territories in early June, entering a vast expanse of rolling grassland dotted with copses of trees. The land here was unclaimed, open to anyone willing to work it, and it stretched to the horizon in every direction. It was beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. They found a spot near a river, with good soil and natural shelter from a line of hills. It was farther from any settlement than Prescott's old farm had been, which suited them perfectly. They set up camp and began the work of building. It was brutal labor, clearing land and raising structures from nothing, but Prescott had done it before, and this time he was not alone. Grishka worked alongside him with tireless energy, her orcish strength making tasks that would have taken him days go much faster. They built a small cabin first, just one room with a fireplace, but it was theirs. The day they finished the roof, Grishka stood back and looked at it with pride. "It is not much," she said. "It is perfect," Prescott corrected. That night they christened their new home properly, making love for the first time on a bed of soft furs they had bought from a traveling trader. It was gentle and passionate, and everything Prescott had imagined, and when Grishka fell asleep in his arms afterward, he felt more at peace than he had in his entire life. They spent the summer building their homestead. A barn went up, smaller than the one he had lost but sturdy. They planted a garden, started raising chickens again, and bought a pair of goats from a frontier family they met at a trading post. Word spread slowly that there was a human and an orc farming together out on the grasslands, but most people seemed too busy with their own survival to care much about what their neighbors looked like. In August, they had their first visitors, a family of settlers who had heard about them and wanted to meet Grishka. The parents were cautious at first, but their children were fascinated, asking questions with the blunt curiosity of the young. By the time the family left, they were friends, and they promised to come back for a harvest celebration. "See," Grishka said after they left, "not everyone is like those men in Millbrook." "I am starting to believe that," Prescott admitted. September brought the harvest, and it was better than Prescott had dared hope. Their fields yielded generously, and their animals were healthy and thriving. They held a small celebration, inviting the handful of families they had met, and Grishka taught them some of her clan's songs. People laughed and danced and ate until they were stuffed, and for one golden evening it did not matter who was human and who was orc. In late October, on the anniversary of the night Prescott had freed her, Grishka came to him with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," she said. His heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I am with child." The world seemed to stop. Prescott stared at her, trying to process the words, and then joy exploded through him like fireworks. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." She smiled nervously. "I know we did not plan this and it will be difficult," but he swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed. "This is the best news I have ever received in my life," he said, setting her down carefully. "You are going to be a mother. We are going to have a baby. You are happy." Happy does not even begin to cover it. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and where to put a crib, and how they would manage the work once the baby came. Prescott found himself overwhelmed with protectiveness, wanting to wrap Grishka in furs and make sure she never lifted anything heavy again. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, reminding him that orc women were strong and that pregnancy was not an illness. Winter came gentle that year, bringing snow but not the brutal cold they had endured the previous year. Prescott worked on baby preparations, building a cradle from pine wood and carving animals into the sides. Grishka knitted tiny clothes and sang to her growing belly, teaching their child the songs of her people before it was even born. They married in January, a simple ceremony performed by a circuit preacher who came through the territories every few months. The man was old and kind, and when he saw them together he smiled like he was seeing something wonderful. "Love like yours is rare," he said after declaring them husband and wife. "Hold on to it, protect it. The world needs more of what you two have." Grishka became Grishka Calloway, and Prescott felt a possessive pride at giving her his name, at making their commitment official in the eyes of their community and whatever gods might be listening. The baby came in early April, arriving with the spring thaw. The labor was long and difficult, and Prescott paced outside the cabin like a caged animal while a midwife from a neighboring homestead attended to Grishka. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "And he is perfect." Prescott rushed inside to find Grishka propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle to her chest. The baby was green-skinned like his mother, with his father's dark hair and eyes that were still deciding what color they wanted to be. He had small nubs where tusks would eventually grow, and his ears were slightly pointed. He was a perfect blend of both his parents, and Prescott fell in love instantly. "Hello, little one," he said, carefully taking the baby when Grishka offered him. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name him?" Grishka asked. They had discussed many names over the winter, but now, looking at his son, Prescott knew. "Thomas," he said, "for my father." "Thomas Calloway." Grishka tested the name and nodded. "It is good." Little Thomas was a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Prescott and Grishka stumbled through the first weeks of parenthood in a fog of exhaustion and wonder, learning together how to soothe and feed and change this tiny person they had created. Their neighbors came by with gifts and advice, and the community rallied around them in a way that made Prescott grateful they had come west. Summer arrived again, and with it came a letter from Captain Mitchell, forwarded through the complex network of traders and travelers that connected the frontier to the settled lands. Prescott read it aloud to Grishka while Thomas nursed. "Calloway, hope this finds you well." Thomas Ridge and 2 others were arrested for arson. They confessed when faced with evidence and are awaiting trial. Justice moves slow, but it moves. The farm has been claimed by someone else, a young family from the south. They are good people and will treat it well. "I hope you have found peace wherever you are. You earned it." Mitchell Grishka looked up from the baby. "How do you feel about that?" Prescott considered. Once, the news about his farm would have devastated him. But now, holding his wife and son in a home they had built together, it felt like closing a chapter rather than losing something precious. "I feel free," he said honestly. "Like the last thread tying me to the past just broke, and now I can fully be here." "I am glad," Grishka said softly. They settled into the rhythms of their new life. Thomas grew quickly, thriving in the clean air and open spaces of the frontier. By his first birthday, he was walking and babbling in a mix of common tongue and Orcish words that Grishka taught him. He was curious and fearless, toddling after the chickens and trying to climb everything in sight. Prescott and Grishka expanded their homestead, adding more fields and a smokehouse and a small workshop where Prescott could do carpentry. Grishka's skills with plants became legendary among their neighbors, and people came from miles around to ask her advice about their crops. She gave it freely, happy to share her knowledge, and their home became a gathering place for the small community that was growing up around them. On a warm evening in late summer, when Thomas was 2 years old, Prescott and Grishka sat on the porch they had built, watching their son play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the air smelled of growing things and possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Prescott asked. "Coming here, leaving your people behind?" Grishka leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "I regret that I lost them," she said. "But I do not regret this life we have built. How could I? You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Prescott corrected. "Yes," she agreed. "We did." Thomas shrieked with laughter as he chased a butterfly, stumbling over his own feet and picking himself up with determination. He was strong and healthy and loved. growing up in a world where his mixed heritage was not a source of shame but simply part of who he was. "I want to tell him," Grishka said suddenly, "when he is old enough, about how we met, about the ropes and the oath and everything that came after. I want him to know that love is stronger than hate, that people can choose to be better than their circumstances." "We will tell him," Prescott promised, "when the time is right." That night, after Thomas was asleep in his cradle, they lay together in the bed they shared, the windows open to let in the cool night breeze. Grishka traced patterns on Prescott's chest, her touch familiar and comforting. "I love you," she said. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I have words for." "I love you too," Prescott replied, tilting her face up to kiss her. "You are my heart, my home. Everything good in my life comes back to you. We have built something beautiful here," Grishka said. "Against all odds, despite everything that tried to tear us apart, we made something that will last." "We did," Prescott agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, years to watch Thomas grow and to add to our family and to make this place even better." "More children?" Grishka asked with a smile, "if you want them." "I do. I want this house filled with laughter and noise and life. I want us to grow old surrounded by people we love. Then that is what we will do." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, as they had every night since that first blizzard. And in the morning, they woke to sunlight and their son's happy babbling and the promise of another day to build their life together. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas was joined by a sister, Elena, who had her mother's green skin and her father's stubborn chin. Then came another son, Marcus, and finally twin girls, Lily and Rose, who were absolute terrors from the moment they could walk. The cabin was expanded multiple times to accommodate the growing family, and the homestead flourished under their combined care. Prescott's hair went gray at the temples, and Grishka's face gained the lines that came from years of laughter and sun. But their love never wavered, never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper with time, settling into the comfortable certainty of two people who knew each other completely and chose each other every single day. The frontier community grew around them, developing into a proper settlement with a school and a general store and even a small church. Prescott served on the town council, and Grishka taught the children about farming and herbalism. Their mixed-race children were accepted without question, growing up in a world that was slowly learning to be better than the one their parents had known. On the 20th anniversary of the night Prescott cut the ropes from Grishka's wrists, they took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with trusted neighbors. They rode out to the spot where they had first made camp when they arrived in the territories, looking out over the land they had transformed. "You remember what you said to me?" Prescott asked. "That first night, 'My life is yours now,'" Grishka quoted. "It was true then. It is still true now. And my life is yours," Prescott said, "has been from the moment I saw you tied to that tree, will be until my last breath and beyond." "We have had a good life," Grishka said, leaning into him. "The best," Prescott agreed, "and we are not done yet. We still have years to watch our grandchildren grow and to drive our children crazy with our old people ways." Grishka laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been 2 decades ago. "I look forward to it, all of it. Every day with you is a gift." They watched the sun set over the land they had claimed and tamed and filled with love, and Prescott thought about fate and choice and the strange paths that led people to where they were meant to be. He had been a soldier, a farmer, a survivor. But his truest self, his best self, had emerged only when he met an orc girl in the forest and chose kindness over hatred, love over fear. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Let us go home." Grishka took his hand, her grip still strong despite the passing years, and together they rode back toward the lights of their homestead, toward the sound of their children's voices, toward the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination, and a love that refused to be denied. The world was still not perfect. There was still prejudice and violence and people who would never understand what they had. But in their corner of the frontier, on the land they had made their own, Prescott and Grishka Calloway had created something remarkable: a family, a community, a legacy of choosing love in the face of everything that told them not to. And that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything.